Daddy, he is my brother. When Millionaire CEO Nathaniel Moore takes his daughter out for ice cream, her innocent words shatter the carefully constructed life he's built since the death of his wife and newborn son. Across the street stands a boy, ragged, hungry, and hauntingly familiar. He has his daughter's face and his late wife's eyes. What begins as a shocking coincidence spirals into a dangerous unraveling of family secrets, betrayal, and a decades-old inheritance scheme. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sun cast a golden hue across the city streets as Nathaniel Moore stepped out of his black Bentley, holding his daughter's small hand. His suit jacket fluttered in the summer breeze, but his demeanor remained poised, refined as always. Nathaniel was a man who turned heads, not just because of his wealth or his tailored clothes, but because of the quiet power he exuded. As CEO of Moore Industries, he rarely had time for simple pleasures. But today was different. "Come on, Daddy," Ella chirped, tugging at his hand. Her curls bounced with every skip, and her cheeks were already flushed with excitement. "You promised ice cream." "And I keep my promises," he smiled, letting the business calls and boardroom stress melt away, for now. For Ella, he'd make the time. They walked down the boulevard, past boutiques and cafes, toward her favorite little gelato shop on the corner. As they approached, Ella suddenly slowed, then stopped. Her wide eyes stared across the street, lips parted, confused. She blinked a few times, then pointed. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He is my brother." Nathaniel froze. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Ella's eyes didn't leave the boy across the street. "He's my brother," she said again, louder this time, her voice rising with certainty. Nathaniel followed her gaze. A boy, perhaps 6 years old, stood alone at the edge of the sidewalk. His clothes were too small and worn thin, his shirt was stained, and his pants were frayed at the ankles. He was barefoot, with dirt on his cheeks and arms, but that wasn't what struck Nathaniel. It was the boy's face. There was something eerily familiar in his eyes, something that clutched Nathaniel's chest in an instant of quiet horror. The boy didn't notice them at first. He was staring longingly through the window of a bakery, watching as a couple of kids inside devoured a chocolate cake. Then, sensing eyes on him, he turned. That was when Nathaniel saw it. The boy's eyes, large almond-shaped, were Helen's eyes. His late wife. Eyes that haunted Nathaniel's dreams. Eyes that once looked at him with warmth and laughter before life stole her away. "Ella," he said softly, crouching down. "Why do you think he's your brother?" "I don't know," she said honestly. I feel it. He looks like me. He feels like me." Nathaniel looked between them. She wasn't wrong. The boy glanced back toward them, wary now. He looked like he was about to bolt. "Wait," Nathaniel called gently, raising a hand. "Are you hungry?" The boy hesitated. He didn't speak, but his expression gave him away. "Would you like some ice cream?" Nathaniel asked, standing slowly and motioning to the shop. "We're just going in. You're welcome to join us." The boy looked around, as if making sure no one was watching or laying a trap. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. They sat at a small table inside the bright, colorful shop. Ella insisted the boy sit beside her. Nathaniel ordered 3 cones. Chocolate for Ella, vanilla for himself, and strawberry for the boy. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked gently, watching him devour the scoop as though he hadn't eaten in days. "David," the boy replied softly, barely audible. Nathaniel's heart twisted. "Do you live nearby?" David nodded, not looking up. "Over there," he said, gesturing vaguely in the direction they came from. Nathaniel said nothing more. He didn't press. He simply watched as the 2 children chatted. Rather, as Ella chatted and David listened. She giggled at her own jokes, and occasionally, David allowed himself a small smile. And all the while, Nathaniel watched them with a growing sense of unease. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But he couldn't ignore it. The way they looked at each other. the curve of their noses, the similar shape of their faces. And those eyes, David's eyes. Helen's eyes. After they finished, Nathaniel asked David if he could walk him home. Again, the boy hesitated. "It's okay," Nathaniel said. "I just want to make sure you're safe." David eventually nodded. They walked down a narrow alley, into a neighborhood Nathaniel hadn't stepped foot in for decades. The streets were littered with broken bottles, and the buildings sagged under years of neglect. They reached a rusting iron gate, and David pointed toward a crumbling two-story building. "That's where I live," he murmured. A woman appeared in the doorway. She was mid-30s, haggard, with hollow eyes and a cigarette between her fingers. She barely glanced at David before fixing her eyes on Nathaniel. Her expression darkened immediately. "Who are you?" she asked. "Just someone who bought your son an ice cream," Nathaniel replied calmly. She gave him a skeptical once-over, then grabbed David by the arm. "Get inside," she barked. David obeyed. Nathaniel didn't say a word. He just watched the door shut behind them. As he turned and walked away, Ella already fast asleep in his arms. The doubts he'd once buried began clawing their way back to the surface. The boy had her eyes. His son was supposed to have died at birth. His son and his wife. But something didn't add up. And Nathaniel Moore didn't become a CEO by ignoring what didn't add up. Not this time. The night air was cool as Nathaniel stepped into the marble-floored foyer of his penthouse. Ella's tiny arms curled around his neck. She had fallen asleep in the car, the way children often do, instantly and deeply. Her soft breathing brushed against his collar as he carried her upstairs. He walked into her lavender-painted room, past the framed photos of butterflies and clouds, and laid her gently onto the bed. She murmured something, maybe a dream or a memory, but didn't wake. He pulled the blanket over her and kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams, baby," he whispered. But Nathaniel Moore would not sleep that night. He walked to the study, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of scotch. The dark room pulsed with shadows, lit only by the golden glow of the city below. He stood at the window for what felt like hours, watching the skyline, lost in thought. That boy. Those eyes. Helen. He hadn't thought about the delivery in years, not in any real way. Not since the day the doctors came out of that sterile white room and told him what no man should have to hear. "We're so sorry, Mr. Moore. Your wife and your son didn't make it." He had screamed. He remembered that. Not loud, not wild, but it was as if his soul tore itself from his chest in silence. They had given him Ella, only Ella. A miracle child, they said. The twin who survived. A fragile baby girl wrapped in a white blanket. She was all he had left. And so he had buried Helen and a baby boy he never saw. Nathaniel dropped into the leather armchair, his hand shaking as he set the glass down. But now there was this boy, David, who looked just like Ella, who had Helen's eyes. He rubbed his temples. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe grief had distorted his memory. Or maybe, God help him, he wanted to believe in a lie because it was easier than living with the truth. But no, that wasn't it. The resemblance was too strong, too clear. Ella saw it first. That alone unnerved him. He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out an old photograph, faded, bent at the corners. Helen, glowing, 8 months pregnant, her arms wrapped around her belly, laughing as he kissed her cheek. He could still remember the way she smelled, jasmine and honey. Then another photo, taken just weeks after Ella was born. She was tiny, wrapped in pink. He remembered cradling her in one arm as he stood over Helen's grave. No one ever gave him a photo of his son. No footprints. No lock of hair. Just a certificate of stillbirth. Just nothing. That never sat right with him. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering. For a moment, he considered calling his head of security, but something told him not to involve anyone, not yet. Not until he had something concrete. He did what any father with too much money and too many unanswered questions would do. He searched for the best pediatric DNA lab in the country. He would do this quietly. He would do it thoroughly. He would do it now. The next morning, before Ella woke, Nathaniel returned to the neighborhood where David lived. He parked further away this time, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, trying to avoid attention. The streets were already buzzing with activity. Cars honking, vendors yelling, kids running barefoot. He waited. Soon, David emerged from the building, holding a torn backpack. He looked tired, thin, unloved. Nathaniel approached slowly, careful not to frighten him. "David," he said, kneeling to the boy's level. "Hey, it's me." The boy looked up, wary again. "Remember me? From yesterday? I brought you ice cream." David nodded faintly. Nathaniel offered a gentle smile. "I need a favor. It's a strange one, but I promise it won't hurt." He pulled a small cotton swab from his coat pocket. "I just need to swab your cheek. It's like a tickle. That's all." David's eyes widened with confusion, but he didn't pull back. "Why?" he asked softly. Nathaniel hesitated, then told the truth. "Because I think you're someone very important to me, and I need to be sure." There was a long pause. The boy, oddly, didn't ask more. He nodded slowly. Nathaniel swabbed the inside of his cheek, sealed the sample, and tucked it away. "Thank you, David." He reached into his wallet, pulling out a few folded bills, more than enough for a week's worth of food. But the boy shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. Nathaniel stared at him, stunned. "A child turning down money? Why not? She'll be mad." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "She hits you." David didn't answer. Nathaniel stood up slowly, fighting the urge to march into that building and drag the woman out by her hair. But he didn't. Not yet. He simply said, "I'll see you soon, okay?" David nodded, then turned and walked away. Nathaniel watched until he disappeared behind the cracked wooden door. His mind was racing. He had the DNA sample. Now came the part that terrified him the most. Waiting for the truth. The envelope sat on his desk like a ticking bomb. Nathaniel stared at it, his heart pounding louder than the city traffic outside his office window. The lab's insignia was stamped in the corner, discreet, professional. They had promised a 72-hour turnaround, and they'd delivered. But now the silence was deafening. He reached for it once, then again. Paused. His hand hovered just inches from the paper, fingers twitching with the weight of what this envelope could mean. Could destroy. Could redeem. He was a man used to certainty, contracts, numbers, logic. CEOs didn't operate on guesses. But today, Nathaniel Moore felt like a gambler sitting in front of the final card. With one breath, slow, deliberate, he picked it up and tore the seal open. The rustle of the paper echoed in the stillness of the office. His eyes scanned the lines quickly. Too quickly. His mind scrambled to catch up. Then everything stopped. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. The words hit him like a truck. He blinked. Reread. Read again. His knees buckled slightly as he dropped into his chair. David was his son. His son. His living, breathing, hurting son. All these years. All the pain. All the guilt of holding only one child, while thinking the other had been lost with Helen in that hospital room. It was a lie. It had all been a lie. Nathaniel stood up so fast his chair tipped back and slammed to the floor. He didn't even notice. He paced the room like a man on fire. The memories rushed in now, unrelenting. The pale-faced doctor. The nurse who couldn't look him in the eye. The closed casket. The single death certificate. He had accepted all of it because he was drowning in grief. Because the thought of losing both Helen and their son in one day had broken him in ways he didn't want to revisit. But he'd never asked to see the body. Never questioned the lack of photos or footprints. Because he trusted the system. Because grief made you blind. He slammed his fist onto the desk, teeth gritted. Someone had taken his child. Someone had buried a lie so deep, it nearly went undiscovered. He picked up his phone. "Tamara," he said, voice sharp. His assistant answered instantly. "Yes, Mr. Moore? I need to speak with someone in private security. The best we have. No PR firms, no legal teams. I want a deep background investigator. Quiet. Discreet. Highly connected." There was a pause. Tamara had worked with him long enough to know when not to ask questions. "I'll have a short list in an hour. Make it 30 minutes. He hung up. Nathaniel wasn't a man prone to vengeance. He didn't like messes. But someone had orchestrated this. Someone had made sure his wife died believing both of her children wouldn't grow up together. Someone had seen Helen in that hospital room, scared, exhausted, and still chose to rip her family apart. He looked at the test results again. There was no joy. Not yet. Just fire. By the end of the day, he was sitting across from a man named Lucas Varelli in the privacy of his study. Lucas looked more like an academic than an investigator. Trim beard, black-rimmed glasses, and a leather-bound notebook. But his resume was a masterclass in unraveling the impossible. Nathaniel handed him the DNA results and sat back, arms folded. "I want answers," he said. "Real ones. No stone unturned. I need to know what happened in that hospital the night my children were born." Lucas didn't flinch. "Names of the attending staff?" he asked calmly. "I'll have Tamara get the full list." It was River Valley Medical Center. February 18th, 7 years ago. Lucas nodded and jotted it down. "I need everything. Delivery team, medical records, CCTV archives, if any exist, morgue reports, autopsy logs, the nurse who was with my wife when she died. Anne," Nathaniel paused, voice low and sharp. "I want to know who buried a child that wasn't mine." Lucas looked up at him with cool eyes. "I'll find out," he said. "But you should be prepared, Mr. Moore. If this was deliberate, it might not have been random." Nathaniel's face hardened. "I'm counting on that." That night, back at home, Nathaniel stood outside David's apartment again. He didn't knock. He just stood in the shadows, staring at the window where the boy's faint silhouette moved behind the curtain. For now, David was still under someone else's roof, a place he no longer belonged. But not for long. He watched him, thinking of the years lost, of birthday parties missed, of scraped knees never kissed, of stories never told. He thought of Helen, how fiercely she had loved even before the babies were born, how she'd made lists of names and painted the nursery by hand. Would she have survived if the truth had been known? If the pain hadn't broken her? Nathaniel didn't know. But someone would pay for her pain, and his son would never know suffering like that again. The first crack in the truth came 3 days later. Lucas Varelli stood in Nathaniel's private study once again, a laptop open in front of him, his notebook stacked with printed reports and marked photographs. He was methodical, deliberate, the kind of man who never wasted words. "I've reviewed all medical records and pulled logs from the hospital staff who were on rotation that night," he said calmly, fingers tapping on the keys. "Your wife was admitted to River Valley at 11:12 p.m. She was already in active labor. The lead physician on duty was Dr. Richard Adebayo. 2 nurses, Maryline Kroll and Dana Whitaker, assisted during the delivery. A 3rd nurse, one who didn't appear on the official chart, was logged into the wing's security system using a guest badge." Nathaniel leaned forward. "A guest badge?" Lucas nodded. "Someone who had access but shouldn't have. The badge ID was registered under the name of a technician who wasn't working that week. So someone forged it." "Yes. And here's the part that matters." Lucas flipped the laptop around. A paused surveillance clip from one of the hospital's old security archives filled the screen. Grainy. Time-stamped. February 19th, 3:47 a.m. The camera was angled down a dimly lit corridor. In the frame, a nurse wheeled a clear bassinet down the hall. The baby inside, wrapped in a blue blanket. Lucas hit play. Seconds later, the nurse stopped abruptly. A man stepped into frame. He wasn't dressed like a doctor. No scrubs. No badge. He wore a long coat, glanced up, almost into the camera, and nodded at the nurse. Then he leaned down, looked into the bassinet, and, just for a second, smiled. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. Lucas paused the clip again. Zoomed in. The man's face was partially obscured by shadow, but the jawline, the cheekbones, the curve of his mouth. They were unmistakable. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Marcus," he said under his breath. Lucas sat back, folding his arms. "Your cousin, Marcus Moore. Full access to your family wing during Helen's pregnancy. He was listed as next of kin in one emergency contact file." Nathaniel's face flushed with heat. Of course he was. He remembered the way Marcus hovered back then, grieving with him, weeping at the funeral, giving speeches about how the company would be Ella's one day, even if she's not a son. Nathaniel had been too numb to hear the edge in those words, too broken to question Marcus' constant presence. But now the pattern was clear. Why? Nathaniel asked bitterly. Why would he do this? Lucas answered without hesitation. Inheritance. Your grandfathers will outline one condition, clear and explicit. If your bloodline produced no surviving male heir, more enterprises would pass to the next eldest male descendant of his lineage. Nathaniel looked away, jaw clenched. Marcus. Lucas nodded. He wasn't going to let a male heir stand in his way, especially not one who couldn't defend himself. The thought made Nathaniel sick. The betrayal wasn't just cold, it was surgical. He turned to the screen again, watching the frozen frame of Marcus leaning over his newborn son like a hunter over his prey. Did you track down the body? He asked, voice low. Lucas sighed. That's the final twist. The child you were told was your son, the one who died at birth, was never legally declared deceased. There's no coroner's record, no autopsy. The morgue entry was forged. The baby that was buried under your son's name belonged to another woman. A woman whose child had died during a complicated home birth only a few hours earlier. Nathaniel went cold. They switched them. Yes. He could barely breathe. My wife died, thinking our son was gone. Lucas looked down, giving him space, but Nathaniel rose from his seat like something inside him had just detonated. He made her die hopeless. His voice cracked. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Moore, the towering, steel-hearted CEO, sounded utterly shattered. Then, as quickly as the emotion came, it hardened. He clenched his fists. I want him exposed. Lucas lifted his head. There's more. He reached into his folder and slid a document across the table. Marcus didn't act alone. He had help from a hospital administrator, retired now. The woman who raised David? She was paid. Nathaniel stared at him. Paid. Regular monthly deposits. From an offshore account connected to a shell company Marcus created 8 years ago. He couldn't breathe for a moment. She knew. She knew he wasn't hers. She was told he was the child of a woman who died in delivery, and she was doing a good deed by taking him in. But she was paid to keep quiet, paid to raise him in the shadows. Nathaniel grabbed the report and scanned it. His hands shook with rage. She neglected him, he said. He's afraid of her. Lucas nodded. I know, but now that you have DNA confirmation, plus a full chain of fraud, we can build the case. I have a team compiling the evidence for court and law enforcement. Marcus will face charges of fraud, kidnapping, obstruction, conspiracy, at minimum. Not just court, Nathaniel said coldly. I want a press conference. When this goes public, I want the whole world to know what he did. What he took. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Even if it affects the company? Nathaniel stared at him, fury in his voice. The company can take the hit. But my son is coming home. And with that, Nathaniel reached for his phone. It was time to let the past bleed into the present and cleanse it with the truth. The boardroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that followed a successful deal or a finished presentation. This silence was heavy, stretched, waiting. Nathaniel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, arms folded across his chest, face unreadable. The usual hum of city traffic just outside the windows was drowned by the weight in the room. To his left sat Lucas Varelli, unassuming in his dark gray suit, a thin briefcase at his feet. To his right, an empty chair. Until now, the doors creaked open, and Marcus Moore strutted in like a man arriving to deliver a lecture. Navy blue blazer, crisp and designer. He gave a mocking half-smile and walked toward the table without hesitation. Nathaniel, he said smoothly, you could have just called. I did, Nathaniel replied coldly. You ignored it. Marcus sat, crossing one leg over the other. So what's this about? Quarterly projections? Or are we finally discussing expansion in Singapore? Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply slid a folder across the table. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Slowly, he opened it. He flipped through the first page. Then the second. DNA test. Surveillance stills. Financial statements. Offshore accounts. Signed hospital documents. Witness statements. Marcus's smirk faltered. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the next page. By the fourth, the color had drained from his face. "You've been busy," he said quietly, voice colder now. "You stole my son." The words landed like gunshots. Nathaniel didn't yell. He didn't pound his fists or spit rage. His voice was sharp as glass, low, steady, lethal. "You paid off a hospital. You forged documents. You swapped a dead infant into my wife's arms and told me he was mine. You buried my son's name under a gravestone that doesn't belong to him. You watched me mourn. You watched me lose her." Marcus leaned back, blinking too fast. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Nathaniel stood. "My wife died hopeless because of you. You robbed my daughter of her brother. You took a newborn boy, my son, and abandoned him to a woman who could barely care for herself, let alone a child." Marcus stood too, breathing faster now. "I did what I had to. You don't understand. I understand everything." Nathaniel stepped forward slowly, no louder than before, but something in the room shifted. The air itself seemed to recoil. "You wanted the company. You wanted the Moore name. You knew that if Helen gave me a son, you'd lose everything. And you thought I'd never find out." Marcus's voice cracked. "It was our legacy too, Nate. I was next in line. You don't know what it was like growing up in your shadow. Always second. Always overlooked. You had the name, the inheritance, the love of grandfather. And when you married Helen, you sealed it. When she got pregnant, twins, I knew it was over. So you killed a future to secure yours," Nathaniel said flatly. Lucas opened the briefcase and handed a thin sheaf of papers to Marcus. He looked down and froze. A formal statement. From Child Protective Services. Another, a court summons. And finally, a warrant. "You're being charged with felony conspiracy, falsification of medical records, kidnapping, and fraud," Lucas said, calm and detached. "You'll be taken into custody this afternoon." Marcus looked up, something flickering behind his eyes, fear or fury or both. "You're going to ruin the Moore name," he hissed. "No," Nathaniel said, stepping back. "You did that. I'm just cleaning up the rot." Security entered the room. They moved in without a word, flanking Marcus as he stepped back, hands trembling. "I was smarter than you," Marcus spat, his face twisted with desperation. "And you still win. You still get everything." Nathaniel looked at him one final time. "I get my son," he said. "You get a prison cell. I'm fine with that trade." The doors closed behind them with a sharp click. Outside the courthouse later that week, reporters swarmed like wasps. Nathaniel stood before a sea of microphones, Ella's small hand gripping his as Lucas and legal representatives flanked them. He took a breath. "My name is Nathaniel Moore. 7 years ago, I was told that my wife and newborn son died during childbirth. I grieved that loss. I raised my daughter alone, believing she was all I had left. But I was lied to." Flashes erupted. Cameras clicked. "My cousin Marcus Moore engineered a cruel deception to eliminate my son as heir to our family company. He bribed hospital staff, forged medical reports, and left my son in the care of someone unfit, just to advance his own claim." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I'm here today not only to say that justice has begun, but to reclaim what was stolen. My son is alive. His name is David. He's home now. And as a father, I will never again let anyone hurt my family." He stepped back. He didn't wait for questions. He had said what mattered. That night, in the quiet warmth of his home, Nathaniel sat on the couch beside David, who now had his own room, his own clothes, and a bed that didn't creak when he turned in it. David clutched a stuffed bear Ella had given him. He wasn't talking much yet, but he didn't flinch when Nathaniel touched his hand now. "Do you want to stay here?" Nathaniel asked gently. David looked up at him, then slowly nodded. A long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, Do I get to call you Dad? Nathaniel's throat closed. He blinked hard, smiled through the storm in his chest, and whispered, Yes. Yes, you do. And for the first time in 7 years, something inside him healed. The house was quieter now, not with silence, but with peace. Gone were the days of empty echoes and sterile hallways, the haunting stillness that had settled into Nathaniel's home after Helen's death. The halls now carried the soft patter of 2 sets of feet, one light and familiar, the other cautious, newly claimed, and still learning its rhythm. David's rhythm. He had been living in the Moore household for 3 weeks. It wasn't seamless. Healing never was. Some nights, he would wake up screaming. Other nights, he wouldn't speak at all. He didn't know how to ask for things. He hovered near the kitchen doorway instead of entering. And he flinched when shoes hit the floor too loud. But he smiled now. He laughed, just a little, when Ella made silly faces at the breakfast table. He said thank you, with quiet pride when Nathaniel handed him juice. And one day, without a word, he climbed onto the couch beside his father and leaned his head on his arm. Nathaniel hadn't moved for nearly an hour, terrified that if he so much as breathed, the moment would vanish. Therapy sessions became part of their weekly rhythm. Nathaniel insisted on the best child psychologist in the state, someone trained in trauma recovery. At first, David wouldn't talk. He just drew. But the drawings were loud. A stick-figure boy standing in the rain. A woman with no face sitting on a couch while the boy stared from a corner. Then a man in a black suit. Tall. Standing with arms wide open. Each week, the colors got brighter. The lines less shaky. One session, David handed the therapist a drawing and whispered, That's my dad. He pointed to the man in the suit. The therapist looked at Nathaniel and smiled. Ella took to David with the ease only children can manage. She didn't ask him questions he couldn't answer. She just brought him into her world like she'd known him all her life. They played board games in the living room and built pillow forts that spanned half the hallway. They argued once, over who got the red Lego piece, but made up with shared marshmallows and a silent handshake. One afternoon, Nathaniel walked into the kitchen to find them both under the table, whispering and laughing. What's going on here? He asked. Ella grinned. It's a twin secret. David nodded, serious. Only twins can know. Nathaniel smiled as he leaned down to their level. I won't ask then. David smiled back. It was the first time Nathaniel saw joy in his son's eyes, unfiltered, unguarded. At the office, Nathaniel took a temporary step back from his CEO duties. The board was skeptical, the press still swirling with the aftermath of Marcus's arrest. But Nathaniel didn't care. My son is more important than quarterly growth, he told them. I've waited 7 years to be a father to both of my children. I don't plan to miss another day. He hired a temporary COO to oversee day-to-day operations and began spending mornings walking the twins to school. They each held one of his hands. People stared, recognizing him, whispering behind coffee cups, but he didn't care. In those quiet, routine moments, the crosswalk signal beeping, the crunch of leaves under their shoes, he felt something he hadn't in years. Normal. One night, just before bedtime, David came into his study clutching a worn notebook. He stood quietly for a moment, then approached the desk. Dad! Nathaniel turned away from his laptop instantly. He still wasn't used to how that word made his heart skip. Yeah, buddy. I wrote something, David said, placing the notebook on the table. Can I read it to you? Of course. David opened to a page and held it up. His voice was soft but clear. When I lived with the lady, I didn't know where I was from. I thought maybe I was bad. But then one day I saw a girl who looked like me. She gave me ice cream. I didn't know it then, but she was my sister. Her name is Ella. She's nice to me. Then her daddy saw me and took me to eat, and then he brought me home. Now he's my dad. I have a bed and a dog and pancakes. I don't feel bad anymore. I feel home. Nathaniel's vision blurred. He reached out and pulled David into his lap, hugging him tightly, his voice shaking. I'm so proud of you, he said, pressing his cheek to David's head. I love you, son. I love you too, Dad, David whispered back. Later that night, Nathaniel sat in the nursery that had remained untouched for 7 years. Helen had painted the stars on the ceiling herself. They still glowed faintly under the low light. He stared up at them, David sleeping upstairs, Ella curled in her bed with a teddy bear. "Helen," he whispered into the quiet. "He's safe now. I found him." His voice cracked. "I wish you could see them." A breeze stirred the curtains. And somehow, in that stillness, Nathaniel felt her there. Maybe not in body, but in the way Ella smiled, in the curve of David's eyes, in the strength she had left behind, woven into both of them. A father once broken, now whole. Sunlight spilled through the arched windows of the Moore estate's garden room, casting long golden rays across the floor. The house, once a sanctuary of stillness and silence, now echoed with life. Laughter, the playful thud of running feet, and the soft, rhythmic cadence of twin heartbeats filled the space. Ella and David were chasing each other around the living room with sock-covered feet, pretending the floor was lava. They had built a fortress out of couch cushions, plush blankets, and stuffed animals, complete with flags made from colored paper and glitter glue. It was, as David declared, a twin kingdom, and Nathaniel was the humble subject who had to kneel to be allowed in. He knelt willingly. "Your Majesty Queen Ella," he bowed dramatically, "and Your Highness King David, I request entrance into your mighty fortress." Ella giggled, placing a plastic crown on David's head. "He may enter, but only if he brings tribute." "What kind of tribute?" Nathaniel asked. "Cookies," David said seriously. "Warm ones." Nathaniel put his hand to his heart. "Your wish is my command." He left them with their fortress as the kitchen filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies. He loved doing this now, cooking, cleaning, things he'd once delegated to staff. But this was different. It grounded him, connected him to the real, raw moments of fatherhood he had been robbed of for too long. He returned 10 minutes later with a plate stacked high. The cookies were devoured in seconds, and crumbs sprinkled across the imaginary kingdom like stardust. Later that evening, the family sat curled on the oversized sectional sofa, wrapped in a blanket that covered all three of them. A movie flickered in front of them, Finding Nemo by Ella's insistence. David had never seen it. When the mother fish disappeared at the beginning, David's body tensed. Nathaniel noticed and instinctively reached out, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. David leaned into him. It was a quiet moment, but one loud in what it meant. They were no longer a pair, father and daughter navigating grief, but a trio, healing and rediscovering family as it was always meant to be. Halfway through the film, Ella leaned toward David and whispered, "We were together before. In Mommy's tummy." David blinked. "Really?" "Yep. Daddy told me. You were squished next to me for months." "Did we talk in there?" Ella giggled. "Maybe. But we didn't know words yet." David stared at her for a second, thoughtful. "I think I still remember." "What?" "That you were there." Nathaniel's chest constricted. Tears threatened the corners of his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Not tonight. Not while witnessing something sacred. Two souls born together, separated by cruelty, now recognizing each other again in the most innocent way. Twinship. Not just in looks, but in something deeper. An unspoken tether. Weeks passed, and with each one the bond grew stronger. They developed their own language, half-words, silly gestures, synchronized routines. They shared a birthday party for the first time, complete with twin cakes. One strawberry, one chocolate. When the crowd sang Happy Birthday, they held hands through the entire song. David had never had a birthday party before. That night, Nathaniel found the two of them curled up in Ella's room, fast asleep, surrounded by wrapping paper and glitter-covered cards. He didn't separate them. He just turned off the light and sat quietly in the hallway, listening to them breathe. Spring bloomed across the city, and Nathaniel took a leap he had long postponed. He brought the twins to visit Helen's grave. It was a clear morning, sky pale blue and washed in light. They stood together in front of the headstone, nestled beneath an old willow tree where soft petals drifted from above like gentle snow. Ella placed a drawing she had made. Their family, all four of them, standing beneath a rainbow. David knelt beside her and added his own, a picture of a woman with long hair, holding two babies in her arms. "Do you think she sees us?" he asked. Nathaniel kneeled behind him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "I do," he said. "I think she never stopped." David nodded, satisfied, and whispered to the grave, "I miss you. I wish you were here." Nathaniel's voice cracked. "She would have loved you so much, David. And she would have been proud of you for being brave." The twins stood in silence for a moment, heads bowed together. Then Ella, ever the light, looked up. "We should bring her flowers next time. And glitter. She liked glitter." Nathaniel laughed. She really did. That night, after the kids were asleep, Nathaniel stood once again in the nursery, now repainted, now repurposed. He looked around at the toys scattered across the floor, the art on the wall made by four small hands, and a photograph on the dresser of him with both children smiling wide. He no longer avoided this room. It was no longer a place of mourning. It was a beginning. He walked to the window and looked out over the city lights. It had taken nearly a decade of loss, lies, betrayal, and aching silence. But now the house was full. He had both of his children. They had each other. And though Helen's physical presence was gone, her spirit lingered in every laugh, every hug, every glint of light in David's eyes. Twins, once torn apart by greed and darkness, were whole again, reunited not just in flesh, but in spirit. And Nathaniel, once a father shattered by grief, was whole again too. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.